Hello, and welcome to our first segment on the early age of European exploration. We have a few different topics that we'll look at today. So, we'll start with new technology. So, what allows these longer voyages? Why haven't they done it before? We'll then look at Portugal's advancement in maritime travel, Spain's contributions, and kind of how they're first connected to the New World. And then at the very end, we'll start to examine some of that Protestant exploration as well. So, what are the Dutch doing during this time that also expands maritime trade? So let's go ahead and dive into some of that new technology that's going to develop around this time that's going to allow Europeans to do that kind of exploration. So, first up, we have things like the compass and the astrolabe, things that are coming out of East Asia, specifically China, that are actually going to help with the navigation needed to be able to make those long voyages. We've also got gunpowder coming out of Asia. We've got the lateen sail kind of coming out of the Arab world. We've got the creation of the side rudder, which is going to make it easier for them to be able to turn ships and travel like a little bit faster. Same thing with the caravels, shipbuilding technology. All of those things are going to contribute to Europeans being able to travel for longer distances. And also all of these pieces of technology, they're all things that are coming, from the East. They're things that Europeans have not had a lot of interactions with because they are just now coming out of the dark ages. Their trade networks didn't extend quite that far. And so now that they have this new technology, there's a lot more doors open to them. Now, thinking back to what we know about new monarchs during this time, we know that there are new people in charge that are looking for ways to make themselves a little bit more powerful than the Catholic Church. They're trying to condense their power, make a more centralized state. And a lot of them are going to see trade as the best way to do this, expanding their trade, making more money for themselves. Other ways during this time period they were attempting to show that kind of power and influence is through things like war, art, even some of that map making and the cartography. Those advanced skills were ways that they could show off some of that new power. But a lot of them realized they needed money to do those things. And arbitrarily raising taxes was not going to be a good way to get what they want. So extending trade is the way that they saw to be able to make money and expand their power and influence. Now, you might think because Italy already had a really vibrant trading culture, it might have been them that took the first steps in exploration. But Italy was faced with a few problems because of their prosperity. They were kind of a target during this time. Both France and the Holy Roman Empire tried to conquer Italy at different points during this time period, and they're having to spend a lot of their money kind of defending themselves rather than focusing on how to expand their trading beyond those lucrative trade ports. The other thing we're going to see during this time period is the Ottomans. The Ottomans are about to become a big headache for Europe because when they take over Constantinople in 1453, now all of the West must go through them to connect to the Silk Road and the Indian Ocean trade route to get any goods from the East. So the cost of getting these goods has gone up a lot because Europeans have to pay the middlemen, the Ottoman Empire, for anything they want to buy. Which is what really leads us to Portugal and their advancements. They're the ones that are going to make those early steps to really break free of that trade pattern with the Ottoman Empire. So, why is it that it's Portugal? Well, first off, they have a ruler that's very interested in navigation, and he sets up these different naval schools to focus on technology and cartography advancement in the naval field. So, he establishes trade routes along the coast of Africa. They actually will capture Morocco and Tangier during this time as well as some sugar islands in 1415 that bring them a lot of money, and they use that money to start kind of expanding their ventures even more. They start creating these trade post cities all across the coast of Africa as they keep traveling further and further down so that they can restock and refuel. And they make a lot of money off these trade posts as well. There's a trade post in Ghana that was created in 1482 that connects them to the gold and slave trade, which is important to think about because they're going to be the first Europeans to really start participating in that African slave trade. And we'll talk a lot more about that later. But it's because of the lucrative, trade that they're doing that they're able to extend their journeys as long as they do. And eventually you do get people that make it all the way around Africa. So Bartholomew Diaz reaches the Cape of Good Hope in 1488 and then he turns around. But then just, less than a decade later, you've got Vasco da Gama making the first voyage all the way to India in 1498. And this was extremely profitable for them. So the profit from this voyage was estimated to be about 60 times the cost of the trip. So obviously, it's worth it to do that, to spend all that money, to take all of that time to send a whole crew to India. They made a ton of money off of this. So now everybody's looking at Portugal thinking, man, we really maybe should get in on some of this action. And Spain is going to be one of those countries. Portugal's neighbor is looking at them thinking, we need to figure out how to get in on this. So Spain at this time was actually not economically very sound. They were much poorer than places like the Holy Roman Empire and France, and they were late to the trade game that Portugal had already established. And this is where Columbus comes in. So remember, Columbus is Italian, and he's already gone to like two different governments at this point to try and get them to sponsor his journey. And Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain are, wanting to listen to him because they've seen how successful the Portuguese are, and their neighbors all around them are growing much more wealthy than they are. So they give Columbus, the charter to go to, circumnavigate the world. That's what he's trying to do. And of course, he didn't have the right circumference, but he did have the right idea. Eventually, he would come back around. So he heads off in 1492 and lands eventually in what is now the Dominican Republic. And while he's there, they'll trade with native people and return to Spain with goods that include things like gold. And, that's what sets off this whole New World travel expedition thing, the God, glory, all of that. But based on this first voyage, this is how the Pope decides on the Treaty of Tordesillas. And the Treaty of Tordesillas is this agreement made by the Pope that really splits up, the new world, quote unquote, for the Pope's, one of his two favorite countries. He can't have them fighting. He's anticipating this already. He's like Portugal, really big maritime empire at this point. I don't want to make them upset and fight with Spain. Spain's also got a lot going on. I don't want them to be fighting with Portugal. And so he decides, he is going to nip any of these altercations in the bud. And he's like, I'm going to divide down what we know. And Spain, you can have everything on the left, and Portugal, you have everything on the right, which would make sense for Portugal because, they already have that maritime empire going on in Africa and into the East Indies. So it would make sense for them. But of course, we know, retrospectively, that Portugal basically just gets Brazil, and Spain's going to get pretty much everything else in Latin America, which is going to contribute to the giant empire that they create in the New World later on. And it's really not too terribly long after that that Portugal starts to decline. This is the kind of their time in the sun, and they're about to kind of go back into the shadows. They are going to spend too much money trying to keep up with Spain and trying to keep up with these long distance maritime trade. They're not really a colonizing empire. They're more concerned with trade and trade ports. So they're not like gaining territories that they're going to tax and, create colonies in to generate more revenue. They also are going to kind of try to copy Spain with some of their religious decisions in the 1500s, early 1600s, which doesn't work out well for them. They're also going to try to expel the Jewish people and the Moors living in their country because, that's what Spain did. But it ends up that they end up losing a lot of their middle class because of that, the people that are solid tax base. So that also hurts them a lot. And then politically, they've been ruled over now for almost 60 years by Philip II, who, if you don't remember, was also, the inheritor of Spain and of the Holy Roman Empire. And eventually, the people are going to revolt. They don't want him there. He's not making choices that are very good for Portugal. He's kind of just more thinking about the Holy Roman Empire in the bigger picture. And that's really it for Portugal. Now, moving on, we're going to look at one of the Protestant states that also kind of make the big impact in maritime trade during this time, which is the Dutch. Now, this will not be the last time we talk about the Dutch, but just a quick little overview. The Dutch are also in search of luxury goods from the East. They want silk, porcelain, calicos, spices, sugar, all of those things. They're going to create the Dutch East India Company to facilitate this trade. They're going to gain control of the East Indies, which are former colonies or trade post cities of Portugal, and they're going to create this really interesting new power dynamic because of this. We'll talk more about the Dutch East India Company when we talk about mercantilism, but essentially, the Dutch East India Company is the first joint stock company. It's also kind of a quasi government. It has very interesting powers. It can wage war, make treaties, establish colonies, and it's considered the first multinational corporation. So the Dutch are going to really be influencing a lot that's going on in the eastern part of the world. They're not going to be so much into the New World trade, but in the Indian Ocean trade, they're going to be a very large presence. And that's really where we'll stop for today. So thanks for watching our first video here about the Age of Exploration and early European history.